To the inaugural edition of the Goud Crowd. Today we have on Jay Valentine. He's the man that created the eBay fraud engine, the TSA No Fly list, and he created the fraud system for 70% of our insurance companies. And today he works with Common Sense Elections, and he's going to be a keynote speaker this Saturday at the Impact Conference, which will be at New Creation Church in Sandy. And so for those of you who are interested, tickets are $25, and you can text UCC to 53445 for more information. So welcome to the show, Jay.
Thank you. Nice meeting you.
Yeah, and just before we get started, so people know, we will be taking live call-ins on the show, probably in the second half of the show. The initial part, we'll first talk to Jay. But can you talk to us about your background and how you got involved in elections?
Well, we're big data guys, and we've invented very advanced technologies that are quantum speed technology called fractal computing. And right after the 2020 election, we got a call from Sheriff Clark in Milwaukee. And Sheriff Clark said, look, you're some of the best data guys in the country. You built the eBay fraud detection engine, the TSA No Fly list. You're the guys who need to look into this. And we said, sure, send us a copy of the voter roll for Wisconsin. So we did. So a couple of days later, we called him back and we said, hey, are you aware that you have people in Wisconsin who voted in the Trump-Biden election and they live in a laundromat, or they live in a Walmart, or they live in a vacant lot? And he laughed. He said, yeah, that's a problem. He said, we use relational technology. We can't see any of that stuff. And so we showed him that it was more than enough to have turned the election. It was well over 100,000 people. In an election, it was won by like 22,000 votes. So since then, we have been brought in and we are working with the data from maybe 22, 23 states. And right now, we are focused particularly on the swing states, and we are demonstrating in the swing states the ballots that are coming in, and those ballots are coming from ineligible locations. Therefore, they are ineligible ballots, and we're categorizing them, we're aggregating them, and we're putting them on our website called stopbogusballots.com.
Can you talk a little bit more about the ineligible addresses? I think for listeners here, there's probably a question about what exactly that would mean.
Sure. One of the things that people have looked at in voter rolls is voter roll fraud. And they look for dead people, and they look for people who falsely said they are a voter. And that's a really small part of what's going on in elections today. The really big part is mailing ballots to ineligible addresses. So what's an ineligible address? Well, an ineligible address is a college dorm. Well, wait a minute, you'd say, how can a college dorm be ineligible? Because Billy has been voting from that college dorm for 18 years. Well, nobody lives in a college dorm for 18 years. So that is what we call temporal ineligibility. It's a totally legal person at a totally legal address. But if you get context to the data, which is what we do with fractal analysis, you can see that it's sure fine for Billy to vote from there for 3 or 4 years, but not for 15 or 18. Let's take another example. Sammy votes from 123 Main Street, and the voter roll says that Sammy is an eligible voter, votes absentee, and votes every year. But when we contrast that list with the property tax records, we find, as we did, I might add, in Utah, that that person is one of 30 people registered at a used car lot where there are no bedrooms. Now, we don't pass judgment on that. We're not here to say that's wrong, because we're not attorneys, we're data guys. We're here to say it's invisible, but we're going to make it visible. And we're making it visible first in all the swing states and later in the other states, so people can see on their voter rolls the anomalous addresses, the preposterous addresses, like people registered at a Walmart, and the addresses that are clearly ineligible, like a person registered at a street corner where there's a park bench. And we publish that on our website, stopbogusballots.com. And what we're doing in the swing states is we're aggregating that so that in the next few weeks, you'll be able to look at Pennsylvania and see how many ballots in Pennsylvania have been cast from such an address. That makes sense?
That does make sense. Can we talk a little bit more about the example of Billy at the dorm room? And I'm wondering how, if you could maybe talk more about how the technology works, because if Billy, I assume, hopefully Billy graduated in a normal amount of time, and then he moved somewhere else, wouldn't he have not been either inactive at that address, so he would have been removed after a particular amount of time, or show up somewhere else as being a registered voter, so then removed from the old college dorm location?
So the way that the technology works is this. Fractal technology is the fastest technology in existence today. We operate at 1,000 to 1,000,000 times faster than technologies like Oracle and relational database. Because of that, we can do things you cannot economically do with those predecessor obsolete technologies. One of those things we could do is called cross-database search. So when you have a voter roll is a one-dimensional roll. It tells me that Bill Jones voted on these dates from this address. It tells me what the address is. It tells me how old he is, maybe his email and his phone number, that kind of data. But it doesn't tell me anything more. So I have no way of knowing if that's an ineligible address. So what do? Well, we bring in other government records. We bring in records from the United States Postal Service called the change of address files. We bring in the property tax records that tell me what kind of building it is and when it was built. What does that allow us to do? Now what we're doing is when we cross-search all of this, we get context to every field. So the field is 123 Main Street in, let's say, Ogden, Utah. But when we add context to it, we see that 123 Main Street is an abandoned strip mall and nobody's lived there for 10 years. Well, that's a pretty interesting piece of data. And remember, we're not doing this onesie twosies. When we do this, we are finding 400,000 of these in each of the swing states except Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, we've already found over 1.4 million of these, all set to get a 2024 mail-in ballot. But what happens is those mail-in ballots aren't going to go to those people because they're gone. Billy's not at the college for 18 years. He's long gone. Who knows where he is? But the ballot will go there. It will be accumulated by a leftist organization or by the Postal Service. And we have testimony after testimony after testimony from U.S. postal employees that those ballots are collected as ineligible ballots in the sense that they're ineligible to be delivered, but they're very eligible to be voted. And those ballots are given to leftist groups and they vote them. They're called non-governmental organizations. In many cases, they're religious charities.
So I'm wondering then can you talk more about that piece of it? Because I think a lot of voters in Utah would be a little bit skeptical of the amount of coordination needed for an NGO to go and pick up these ballots. So just as an example, if a ballot is being sent to a park bench or being sent to a commercial facility, you're saying that somehow it gets from there to the NGO?
Right. And so your point is very well taken. So let's talk about economies of scale. So the NGO knows that if we're going to send 10,000 ballots to 10,000 locations, it's impossible to track them down. So they don't do that. They send 10,000 ballots to 50 locations. Those they control. And let's give you some examples. So one of the examples is they will register particularly illegal aliens. This is happening in Michigan, and it's happening in Pennsylvania, and it's happening in Wisconsin. And we have live witnesses to this. So what the NGOs do is they will register people, and they will register them at a large apartment complex. Well, a large apartment complex is completely legitimate, but they don't put an apartment number on there. So when you mail a ballot to Sam Smith, and that ballot is going to some large apartment complex, and there's no apartment number on there, it's undeliverable. The Postal Service probably won't even deliver it. But if they do, where is it going to end up? It's going to end up on the mailroom floor. And everybody watching your show has been in a dormitory or in an apartment building or even in a U.S. post office where people put their P.O. boxes. And all the junk mail's laying all over the floor. People just toss it. So what happens? So now these NGOs aren't going to 1,000 locations. They're going to 50, but they're getting thousands of these ballots. And we know they're doing it because we have eyewitnesses who see them pick them up. We have testimony from postal workers in Wisconsin and Michigan who say that we take all of these returned ballots. We are told to put 6 rubber bands around them and to put them in an outdoor recycling bin. And the next morning, the ones with the 6 rubber bands are gone, but all the other ones are there. So this is an organized effort led by non-governmental organizations. And if you go to our website, stopbogusballots.com, we actually show you how these organizations operate and work in get out the vote campaigns and things like that. They're all funded by leftist money. And this is how they're doing it. And this is how they're going to steal the 2024 election.
Okay. So just a little bit more, if you could talk a little bit more about kind of the ballot portion. I think what the clerks would say is that for mail ballots, they use signature verification to check your ID, right? And signature verification is a very two people could look at the same signature and they could come to a different view of whether that signature matches a signature that's already on file for the voter. So it's a very subjective way of checking ID. But I think what a county clerk would say in response to what you're saying about the NGOs voting those ballots is, no, it can't happen because we would do signature verification and the ballot would get kicked because the signature did not match.
And that's the kind of a thing I would expect them to say. Just like when I met with members of the legislature in Utah about this time last year, we had a member of one of the voter commission types from the downtown area, Salt Lake City area there, denying everything we said, even though we took copies of the Utah voter roll and found people living in car lots and hotels and stuff like that. They deny, of course. Let me tell you how they're doing it, though. This is pretty interesting. So what they did in Wisconsin, and we're not claiming they do this in Utah, but this is how it's done nationally. What they did in Wisconsin was this woman went to vote in an off-year election, a 2023 primary election, and she voted. And they used something called an electronic poll book, where you sign your signature into an electronic book. It's not signed into a physical document. It's a tablet. You sign your name to a tablet, like when you check out of a restaurant and you sign the tablet. So she did. So then 2024 came along, or whatever the next year election was. It was sometime, that was in the primary in 2024. And she was out of town. But she checked her vote status, and she saw in her vote status that she had voted in a 2024 election. She said, well, I was out of town. I didn't vote in that election. So she went to see her registrar. The registrar said, well, let me go look. Let me bring up your signature. And they brought up her signature, and it was the identical signature that she had used in 2023. So even though she didn't vote in 2024, they used that electronic signature and they applied it to her. So we hear this stuff all the time, but we can tell you right now, we have run the voter rolls of 24, 25 states, including Utah. And in every state, there are enough anomalous ballots floating around in an election to make the difference in a statewide election. And it will be no difference for your state than it is from any other state.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I was talking to you earlier about this, but I actually have a copy of Salt Lake County's voter rolls from 2020. And it's because I worked on an election integrity committee in 2021. I went in there and just sorted it. so I could see what addresses were at PO boxes, and there were more than 5,000 addresses that were listed as PO boxes. So the ballot would be mailed to a PO box. I think that's interesting. I don't think it necessarily means that it's fraudulent, but it's an interesting place to mail your ballot. But I went and looked at our code, and I didn't see anything that would restrict you from having your ballot sent to a PO box, or really any restrictions on where that ballot could be sent. Now, it was a quick look, so if anyone's going to fact check me, just keep that in mind. Does your organization have suggestions about how, or have you had to deal with that? Like when you're talking about these addresses?
Sure. I mean, here's how we deal with that. If you look, I can tell you right now, if you look at the Utah regulations about where a cast ballot can come from, there is not a Utah regulation that says you can have a ballot cast from Mars. There isn't one of those in Utah. Why not? Because it's preposterous that anybody would do that. Well, it's equally preposterous that somebody would cast a ballot from a Walmart, or from an abandoned building, or from a car lot in Salt Lake City, I think it was, where 23 voters were registered. Those are all preposterous. So they are not in your particular regulations, because what happened is for 100 years, the only way that you could vote was in person and very little by mail. So the regulations are meant for people who vote in person. But then the world went to massive mail-in balloting, and the regulations haven't caught up. Now, again, we're data guys. We don't care how you run your state. However you choose to do it, you choose to do it. It's your business. What we want to make sure is that everybody in your state knows what's going on in those voter rolls. Everyone in Utah knows that you have people voting from hotels, from used car lots, and from other anomalous locations. Everybody in Utah knows that Utah is one of the only states in the country that keeps 2/3 of its voter roll illegally away from its citizens to see. Now, why do I say illegally? Because case after case after case has been won. The most recent case was done in the United States Federal Appellate Court in the last 6 months that says in every state, the citizens have the right to see the entire voter roll. And that eventually is going to make its way to Utah, and somebody will file that case in Utah, and the federal courts in Utah will enforce it, and your government's going to have to cough up those rolls. And when they do, people like us are going to come in there, and we're going to show you what's in those voter rolls. And I can assure you, you will be stunned at what you see.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the National Voter Registration Act.
No, I'm not talking about the Voter Registration Act. I'm talking about litigation that has occurred in the last 90 days put out by the Public Interest Legal Foundation, where in Maine and 2 or 3 other states, they have challenged the concept that voter rolls must be given to citizens and not at a price that is an onerous price. And the federal courts in 3 out of 3 cases have come down in their favor. And that eventually is going to make its way to Utah.
Yeah. Sorry, that's what I was referring to. That those cases are based on the National Voter Registration Act. And I think actually Phil Lyman has made a request for the full voter rolls in Utah, including the private and withheld voter registrations, based on the National Voter Registration Act, because that's in that line of cases that suggests that they would override state privacy laws and force the state to divulge the full voter rolls. So I'm more saying that for listeners so that they understand that. Well, I guess, we've made some improvements in Utah's voter laws over the past, I would say, or maybe since the 2020 election. There have been some kind of incremental improvements in terms of transparency, and just trying to make the system a little bit better. Do you think those types of efforts are worth it if there are these address anomalies that you're talking about, or do you think the address anomalies are a bigger problem?
Oh, the address anomalies are the #1 problem in the country by 10 to 1. There's no question. But to the first part of your question, You cannot have too much transparency of your voter rolls. You cannot have too much access by citizens of your voter rolls, because they'll find this stuff. And we find it with fractal quantum technology with one click. But you're going to have diligent sleuths working in your state. And I know you already do, because I'm going to be with a bunch of them on Saturday, who are going through and they're doing a lot of this stuff manually. So whatever you're doing in those lines is a good thing. But what people don't understand is that in 2024, the election is going to be stolen. Whether they get to keep it or not is going to be the story. But it's not going to be stolen through voter fraud. That's what people don't understand. Everybody thinks that groups like ours are pitching voter fraud. Well, we're not. There's voter fraud out there, but it is not what you think it is. What you have is a totally legitimate set of ballots going to a totally legitimate set of people at totally legitimate addresses. All of that is legitimate. And when you look in your voter record, the ballots are legit, the people are legit, and the addresses are legit. What is not legitimate is those ballots don't get to those people because they're undeliverable. Therefore, third parties intercept them and vote them at scale. And we see that, and we have testimony of that, and we filed lawsuits in Georgia and in Wisconsin. I think we're filing another one in Wisconsin this week. And one of the things that just happened today, which shows you how interesting this is. The DNC joined in against our team in Wisconsin, and they said, if you are identifying where these ballots are going to go, thus cleaning voter rolls, it is not in the interest of the DNC. Thus, we challenge it. We're going to publish that. We're publishing it tomorrow or the next day on our Substack, and we're publishing it in Gateway Pundit later this week. We're actually going to publish their quote from their pleading. So this is how this stuff is going on, and you can't close your eyes to it anymore, because if you go to our website, we show you state by state, broken out by address type. This address is ineligible because it's an industrial building. These addresses are ineligible because the guy moved in the last 90 days. And we've got 15 or 20 categories in every state, and they aggregate to a minimum of 400,000 such locations.
Just on the ballots being delivered to places like park benches, because I guess, are you seeing a difference? Like if ballots go to a commercial facility, so a car dealership, it seems like the mail person is most likely just going to deliver them because there could be employees there who have asked for the ballots, right? But if you show up at an address where it's an abandoned building, it's a park bench, just something where you wouldn't normally deliver mail, do the Postal Service employees take those back? Because I know the envelopes say on them, as a return service requested.
And they will take them back, and they aggregate. And so we have testimony, not one person. We have dozens of postal employees who have contacted me and who have been interviewed by some of our attorneys in Wisconsin and our people in Michigan and I think in Illinois. And they've all said the same thing. These things don't get delivered. They get brought into the postal facility and they get put in a special bin for undeliverable ballots. Now, they're not in a bin with undeliverable political mail and the stuff from St. Jude Hospital and the junk mail. They're not in that bin. They're in a ballot bin. And they're told to put undeliverable ballots in such a bin. And every night, they're gone. So when we asked the people, where do they go? They said some people who are not postal employees come in every night and pick them up. So that's what's happening. You can deny it as much as you choose, but we're the guys who have the evidence. We can prove it. We can bring people to the table. We have sworn depositions from postal employees. So we know what's happening, and denial is just not something that's possible anymore.
Well, have county clerks spoken up about this at all? And I'm more wondering, so if the ballots were supposed to be returned, then shouldn't the county clerks have a record of we sent out 600,000 ballots and 5,000 of them came back as undeliverable?
Well, they should. And so here's what we've done. in state after state after state, what we have done is we've run something called the undeliverable ballot database. So the undeliverable ballot database cross searches property tax records and postal records and other databases. And we demonstrate that this is an address where a ballot cannot be delivered. It's a bank. You can't deliver a ballot to a bank because it doesn't have a bedroom. You can't deliver a ballot to a coffee shop. It doesn't have a bedroom. Nobody can live there. And what we do is the teams then meet with the county clerks or the registrars, whatever term of art you use, and we give them the list. Now, we've been doing this in Wisconsin for 3 years. And so they will show this to the registrars. Now, some of the registrars are like really thankful. Wow, that's really cool. We don't have that visibility, and we're going to take those people off, or we're going to make sure they don't get a ballot. In most cases, they just make sure they don't get a ballot. People can show up and vote in person. They just can't get a mail-in ballot. We're not cleaning voter lists here. We're just stopping mail-in ballots. But then the other thing that happens is in a number of these states, like in Milwaukee, we had to file a lawsuit, which they filed 2 weeks ago. And the lawsuit challenged 150,000 of these. It's 11% or 15% of the entire voter roll for the city. And they challenged these and they showed them. Now, what will happen is that the clerks may choose to send the ballots out anyway, which that's okay. That's okay. Because now we have given prima facie evidence to the clerk that if you send a ballot to this location, you're committing an illegal act. And so we have the evidence to back that up, but we're not done. Now that ballot is now in the air. It's loose on its way to an undeliverable address. We then track what's called the cast ballot. The cast ballot is, did that ballot get cast? Did somebody vote it, or did it just disappear? Well, if it disappears, we don't care. But if it gets cast, we care and we pick it up. Now, when it gets cast, it has an address on it. And we know from the address, it's an undeliverable ballot. So here we are in Wisconsin around October 15th or October 20th. And Wisconsin will be decided by 22,000 votes for Trump or for Harris. And we're going to be showing 40, 50,000 undeliverable ballots that were cast. What do you think that's going to do? You think that's going to raise some eyebrows?
Well, if 2020 was indication, I don't know if anything's going to happen. I just wanted to mention that, so the website for if people want to check out the information you're talking about is stopbogusballots.com, right? And on this, I think you said that you've done some work with Utah's information. What all have you? Can you talk about what you've done?
We've done one thing. We got brought in maybe a year ago. It was for the same event we're going to be at on Saturday. I think they had a similar event about a year ago. And we were given a portion of the Utah voter roll. And in Utah, about 50 or 60% of the voter roll you can't see. So we had a small portion of it. And I don't remember how many were, I think 600,000 records or something. And so what we did was we ran it against property tax records and some other things. And we showed demonstrably that in Utah, you have people, maybe it's okay, but you have people voting from hotels, car lots, empty buildings. I mean, we showed a number of those. I think we even did a video at one point. And if we were able to see the entire voter roll, which we can't yet, but we will eventually, those numbers are going to be enough to be able to turn a state election.
So one issue that I found in Utah, and maybe you see this across the country, I don't know, but here people are very uncomfortable when you start talking about the potential for election fraud, or even what you're saying, that ballots could be, our voter rolls are not accurate, ballots could be being sent to ineligible addresses. How do you address people that are that feel uncomfortable with that?
Well, I tell them that they ought to grow up, and they ought to do something that any citizen should do. I mean, when you're an American citizen, you have an unspoken obligation to preserve and to protect the Constitution of the United States. And being a wimp because you are uncomfortable that somebody is showing you that your elections may not be on the level is perhaps a very un-American thing to be doing. If we were making this up, it would be something else, but we're not. We are taking one government record called a voter roll. It is the official government record of the Secretary of State or the Election Commission in any state in America. We're taking a second set of data, which is an official government record, and it is called the personal property tax, on which every county gets its money. So it is extremely accurate. We're taking a third government roll. That government roll is called the United States Postal Service National Change of Address Registry. And we are cross-searching all three of them. And we are showing people voting and ballots coming in from anomalous locations. Now, we don't use the word fraud. We don't say that's fraudulent. If in your state, you want people voting from locations where there's not a building, if that's your choice, that's perfectly fine with us. We don't live in Utah, we live in Texas. You can't do that crap in Texas. But if you guys want to do that in Utah, it's fine. Our goal is to make sure that you have the data on which to make that decision. Now, if you have the data and you say, you know, it's Utah, we're kind of loosey-goosey out here, we want people to vote, and that's fine. Just remember, you've now opened the door, because I can come out to Utah, I can request a mail-in ballot at the Salt Lake City Marriott, I can vote it, and I can fly back to Texas. And you're saying that's perfectly okay. So I think people right now don't have the data. And so when they get the data, maybe there will be some denial, but then there will be acceptance of the data, because it's not an opinion. It's one set of government records contradicting another set of government records. And to make it perfectly acceptable, we even bring in Google Maps, which gives us a street view of the property. So now not only do we tell you that it's a park bench or it's a street corner, there's a Google mapping view showing you the street level view, showing you indeed it is. So you have to come to terms with the responsibilities of citizenship. And one of the responsibilities of citizenship is that you have to keep your government officials accountable. And if you can't see the data, they're not accountable. And every citizen who is in the great state of Utah, probably the most beautiful state in America, every citizen in your state, or most of your citizens who are adults, are invested in the stock market through a 401k or something else, or someone is invested for them, or at some time they've bought a business or run a business. But in every business, what do we have? We have a cash flow statement that must balance with an income statement that must balance with a balance sheet. Why do we have that? Because we want to keep everybody honest. Or even if it's dishonesty, people make mistakes, and we want to see a mistake. So we reconcile those. Well, voter rolls are now being reconciled by people like us. When we reconcile them, we're showing them to you, and you can choose to do whatever you want to do with that data, but we're going to make sure you have the data with which to make a decision.
Has the data been used successfully in any states with litigation or with reforms? And before you answer that, let me just say, if you're listening now and you want to call in, now's the time to call in. You can call 385-899-2134. Okay, go ahead, Jay.
So the answer to your question is, it has been extremely successful where we have done it. So the first thing people need to know is that nobody's cleaning voter rolls. People will tell you, oh, we clean voter rolls. They raise money to clean voter rolls, but they're hardly being cleaned at all. We just published a story on our website, stopbogusballots.com, in Georgia, where they have 45,000 challenges to the voter roll. Most of these have signed affidavits showing there's no such person at that address. Not hardly any of them got tossed out. The judge just said, we're keeping them all on there. So we need a different strategy, and that's the strategy that we have. Now, remember, we didn't start this in 2024. We started this in 2021. And in 2022, in Wisconsin, our team went to registrars of voters, and they would show them, in this particular municipality, you have 650 addresses, maybe 1,200 people. And these addresses are ineligible for whatever reason. And we'd show them what the reason was from a property tax record. And they stopped enough mail-in ballots going out that Senator Ron Johnson was reelected slightly, barely 29,000 votes. He was supposed to win by several hundred thousand, but it made the difference in his election. This year, our teams have gone back to those people, and guess what? Where we were challenging 200,000-300,000 ballots going out, we're now challenging 150. So the surface area has been cut by more than 50%. Now it's still bad, and it's still more than enough to win an election, but we have made huge progress in stopping mail-in ballots. Now nobody's been disenfranchised. No one's taken off a voter roll. If a guy's registered at a Walmart and he wants to go vote, he can just walk down the street to the voter place and cast his ballot, and he's good to go. But he's not getting a mail-in ballot.
Yeah, okay, because I think a lot of voters will be concerned about disenfranchising voters, especially this close to an election. And so it sounds like they just wouldn't get a mail ballot in that situation, right?
Big difference. Nobody is disenfranchised. As a matter of fact, we're protecting the guy. We're protecting the guy who's in the Mission and registered at the homeless shelter. He's long gone because he has moved down to Austin, Texas, where it's nice and warm. But his ballot has been collecting there year after year after year, and somebody's voting for that person. We're protecting that person's right to vote because whoever's voting for him at some religious NGO is committing a fraud against that individual. And we're the only ones who are able to stop that.
Has your group identified specific NGOs that have been involved in the, I guess, the ballot harvesting you're talking about?
Oh, we have. When we publish it on the website, if you go to the website, you're going to see a video we did using fractal quantum technology of the Tides Foundation. We have another one of the Chinese Progressive Association, all of whom are involved in leftist get out the vote campaigns. So if you go and you have to see our video because we're talking about tens of thousands of connections, impossible to see with the human eye. So we had to do it with very advanced technology, but we did our video so you can actually see the video. And you can see how a small group like the Chinese Progressive Association gives money to maybe 24 or 50 institutions. And those institutions give money to another group of institutions who give money to a third group. When they're all aggregated, there's maybe 250,000 organizations, all of whom, or virtually all of whom, are leftist organizations, many of whom are involved in get out the vote campaigns in swing states. And they're getting this money for those purposes from these leftist organizations. And the conservatives and the Republicans have nothing to compare this with. They don't have anything like this.
Right. Okay. Do you have, I think I listened to oh, it looks like we have a caller. So yeah, should we pipe, we have Tracy on the line. So if we want to pipe her in, we'll see what she has to say.
Let's see if I can make this work. Tracy,
Okay.
Are you there?
Yep.
Go ahead. Ask away. We got Jay and Goud. So.
Hi, Jay and Goud. Thanks for having this. It's been really interesting to listen to you, Jay. I love that you're pointing it out that it's quit being a wimp. You have a duty to call out and hold people accountable, because if that is really not done here in Utah, it's actually frowned upon. So I appreciate that. But I did have a question. I had an anonymous tip a couple of months ago that it was a lady that worked at the U.S. Postal Service, and she reported that the envelopes were really different this year, and what they were instructed to do is when they put them through the machine, if they ripped, they were to open them up and shred them. How do you find out where these rules come from? I'm like, where did that rule come from? She said they shredded thousands and thousands of ballots, but she's too scared to not become anonymous.
Well, if you have an ineligible ballot and it's returned and it's shredded, that would be the proper thing to do, is to shred it. What we have evidence of is that ballots are put, I'm sorry?
It wasn't
Well, we have-
valid. Because when she opened it up, it was filled out, but they were instructed to shred it. Just open it up and
okay,
shred
yeah,
it.
okay.
And-
Yeah,
And
that's a
put it in
different.
here.
Shredded at the Postal Service?
That's a different one. We have evidence of that too. So here's what happened in Wisconsin. What they do is they are able to determine ballots that are coming in from heavily Republican locations. And you could do that through zip code analysis. And so in Wisconsin, in Wisconsin, Michigan, our teams have testimony from postal employees that they collect the ballots from heavily Republican locations and they shred them. And we actually did a story on that called Shred the Vote. It's on my Substack, omega4america.substack.com. And we did a story on that called Shredding the Vote. So that is one of the things that they are doing in heavily Republican areas. And your point is well taken. You're not the first person who talked about that.
Just a follow-up on this. Oh, go ahead. Tracy, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just had, what do you do to stop that? Like, how do you find out and how do you get the proof? Is it just because you have to gromma something from the U.S. Post Office?
No.
Like, what do you do to stop it?
So here's what you do. One of the things that we do is we track mail-in ballots when they go out, because we know when a mail-in ballot has been requested and sent, and it depends on the state because every state's a little different. And we check when they come back. And there's a difference there. So we know that a ballot went to Mary Smith at this address. Mary's a Republican and has a high propensity to vote in Republican, in elections, and she votes every year. But her ballot never came back. Now, Mary doesn't know that. And in most states, she won't know that till 30 days after the election. She will not know her vote didn't count. But we pick that up. And so we, just like you age accounts receivable and you age accounts payable, well, we age ballots. So it's now, the ballot's gone out to Mary. Mary votes every single year in every election. She's in a heavily red district and her ballot has not come back. We now have the ability to give that information to the groups who need it so they can contact Mary and she would respond, well, I sent it back in and well, they didn't get it. So you have to do a provisional, and we can do that at scale. Okay. We can do that across hundreds of thousands of people, and we could do that very, very easily. But your point is well taken. That is a very well-known thing that the left is doing, and they're particularly doing it in swing states.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah, thanks for calling in, Tracy. Jay, I do have kind of a follow-up on this. In Utah, you can sign up to get notifications. It's called ballot tracks, and it'll send you text notifications when your ballot is received by the clerk's office. And then they say when it's counted, but it's actually, they can't tell you when your ballot's counted. They can tell you when your signature has been verified, and they separate the envelope from your ballot. So when it's ready to go to be counted, and so people here could get notifications if they signed up for them of when their ballot hit different points. Does that address is that just not available in other states? And would that address the issue that you're talking about of your ballot, you mail it out, but it doesn't show up at the clerk's office?
Sure, it should, as long as there's an electronic trail and it's permanent, that your ballot was cast, you received a ballot, that your ballot was returned, it was accepted as returned by the registrar, yours should be good to go. I mean, that would be an easy way to make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay. So another issue that we've had here is in our elections, we allow candidates to collect signatures to be able to get onto our primary ballots. So we have two paths to get into a primary. The first one is you can go to convention if you get at least 40% of the vote at convention, you'll end up on the primary ballot. And the other is that you can circumvent that convention process and collect a certain number of signatures, depending on the race, to be able to get on the ballot. So, for example, if it's a statewide race, you'd have to collect, I think, 28,000 signatures. But for local races, it would be a smaller number. Do your programs and your data analysis, would those also apply to these? Like, would they be useful for these signature petitions and to be able to evaluate them?
Oh, sure. So what we would do is we would take the petition, and I think the number used was 28,000. And so the first field you have is the person's name. And the second field you have is the person's address. And we know it's in Utah. So what we would do is we would take that and we would run it against the address voter files and the property tax records. And I can tell you right now for sure, in a database of that size, you're going to find hundreds, if not several thousand people at anomalous addresses that don't exist, or addresses that are clearly not the person's address, et cetera. Easily you would find several thousand typically. And so that's a type of thing that we would do. It would only, if we had the records for the state, we don't need the voter records. Remember, we don't need voter records anymore. All we need is the person's name and the person's address, because all we're going to check is the address. And we'll take it for granted that that person is a real person because they made a signature. So somebody did that. What we're checking is it an eligible address? And the question Utah folks would then have to ask themselves is, if we came back and showed you 1,500, 1,000, 500, I don't know what it would be, addresses on a petition, and those addresses were totally anomalous. For instance, they were a Walmart or they were a bank or someplace where a person cannot reside, what would you do about it? That'd be interesting. That would be an interesting experiment.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that, right? Because I think, as we discussed earlier, voters, from my experience, people here seem to want people to vote, and they're willing to accept a lot of kind of like odd addresses, maybe the signature verification process, things that don't necessarily lend themselves to a secure system. And so I guess we would have to see where that led to. I mean, have you?
So are you telling me that in Utah, it's really cool to, and everybody's sort of down for people to be able to vote from anomalous addresses? It's no big deal. But when those people go to a bank for a loan, do the Utah people at the bank think it's cool to have like sketchy addresses? And when you go to the hospital for your Medicare, Medicaid treatment, that's okay. It's sort of the hospital in Utah. Everybody's kind of down with the program that it's okay if people like have sketchy addresses. Nobody could really live there. Are you telling me that it's okay in Utah for your voter roll, but it's probably not okay for everything else? Explain that to me. I think I missed that.
Yeah, I can't. But I can tell you, I mean, that goes to the point about signature verification as well, right? The only place I can think of where your signature as a form of ID is with voting. So if you go to the bank and say, well, I forgot my ID, can I use my signature? I don't think that they're going to allow you to do that. Or if you go to the airport and say, hey, I forgot my photo ID, can I just use a signature? They're not going to allow you to do that. It just seems to be where, from, again, my own impression is people seem to be accepting of some risk, some of these anomalies in order to have a mail-in system where more people can vote.
But why isn't it good that more people can get loans and car loans? Why isn't it good that more people can get medical help? I mean, why do we make voting significantly less secure than these other forms of engagement? I don't understand why I don't understand that argument.
Yeah. I guess that may be a topic for another podcast. We have about 5 minutes left, and I just wanted to ask you kind of a closing question, maybe from me, but more, do you think that people should feel discouraged about voting or about election results based on what you're telling us? I mean, what types of action plans do you tell people to take?
Well, I don't tell people to take any action plans because we're data guys and I don't have any influence over anybody outside of our sphere. But let me tell you what we're doing. So what we're doing is we're taking quantum speed technology and we're applying it to voter rolls right now in 24 states. Eventually, we're going to raise the funding to do it in most states. What are we going to do? We're going to build a parallel system in every state in which we operate to your voter rolls. So remember, we don't need the government to help us out. We can take the publicly available data from the property tax records. We can take the publicly available data from the voter files. In your state, we'll probably have to litigate to get them, but we'll litigate if we have to, and we'll be successful, or somebody else will do it. But those things are going to come out because the courts have already ruled on that, and Utah's not going to be able to be behind that. So we're going to get those voter rolls. And what are we going to do? We're going to run them. We're not going to run them like once a year. We're going to run them 24/7. Every 30 days, every 60 days, we're going to get an update and we're going to have that information there. And in some states, we're going to make it public. In some states, we're only going to make it public to your legislators. It depends on what the state laws are. But we're going to make it so that secretaries of state and voter registrars can no longer hide behind not letting citizens see their data. Because now when citizens can see the context of their data, that you have people voting from these anomalous addresses, you have somebody voting from a college fraternity. This is Alabama, one of the reddest states, voting from a college fraternity for 15 years. And when we checked that person and cross-searched that person, it turned out to be a woman. And she was 109 years old. That's the kind of stuff we're going to show people. And the only way to do that is to run a parallel system in each of these states, showing this in real time, because then we can embarrass the government into doing the right thing. So that's what we're going to do to fight this. What citizens choose to do is up to them.
Is it possible that the woman was identifying as a man? Okay, sorry, a little joke.
I'll tell you, she was 109 years old. So we had her 2 or 3 different ways as being a very anomalous individual.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on to the Goud crowd. I just want to mention to people again, if you want to see Jay Valentine in person speaking, he's going to be the keynote speaker at the Impact Conference on Saturday. And this is coming up Saturday, October 12th at New Creation Church in Sandy. Tickets are $25 and you can text UCC, so Uniform Charlie Charlie, to 53445 for more information. So thanks a lot, Jay, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye now.